Welcome to the Old Roads Podcast, a podcast that seeks to bring the wisdom of the past to the challenges of the present. I am your host, Aaron O'Kelly. I am a pastor and a theological educator. We've been looking at the issue of pro-life policy, the pro-life movement, abortion in the month of April. And the question I want to raise today is, does the pro-life movement still matter now that Roe versus Wade is gone? So let me explain, if you're not familiar with all those terms, what am I asking about here? Well, in January of 1973, the Supreme Court handed down the very monumental Roe v. Wade decision, where the pregnancy of a woman was divided into trimesters, and the Supreme Court said that the states cannot limit abortion at all during the first trimester, but during the second and third, it may limit abortions in some ways. However, there are exceptions for a woman's health. And then the companion case, Doe versus Bolton, defined the health of a mother so expansively to include mental and even economic factors that virtually any pregnancy could be categorized, if a doctor wanted to, as a threat to a woman's health. And so the way I've heard it put, Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton made abortion legal for no reason in the first trimester and for any reason in the second and third trimesters. That's generally how abortion policy went in America from January 22nd, 1973 until just a few years ago. Now, in 1992, there was another significant court case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which dispensed with the trimester framework but upheld the standard of viability outside the womb as the main point at which the state could intervene. But the health exceptions were still there. And so Planned Parenthood versus Casey really, it modified Roe v. Wade, but it really upheld the basic ideas behind Roe v. Wade. And so for about 50 years, we had a policy in the U.S. imposed by the Supreme Court that said states cannot restrict abortion. That was basically where we were. States cannot restrict abortion because there's always a way to find an exception given how lax the standard was. However, on June 24th, 2022, in the Supreme Court case Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, the Roe versus Wade decision and the accompanying Planned Parenthood versus Casey, these decisions were both overturned by the Supreme Court, and the issue was sent back to the states now. So states legally have the authority, according to the Supreme Court, to make their own policies regulating abortion, and many states have become very restrictive on the issue of abortion. Many states are still very lax and permissive, and so we have now this combination of blue states and red states, or the more permissive states and the more restrictive states. Now, we could look at that and say, game over, right? The pro-life movement won. We got Roe v. Wade overturned. And by the way, Roe v. Wade was overturned because of the justices that President Donald Trump appointed during his first term in office. He appointed Neil Gorsuch. He appointed Brett Kavanaugh. And you remember the fight over Brett Kavanaugh was completely ridiculous. And yet I give great credit to President Trump for standing by his nominee through all of that, because Kavanaugh turned out to be a very good justice on this issue and on many other issues. And then, of course, he had the opportunity to appoint Amy Coney Barrett to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg shortly before he left office in his first term. And so it was largely because of the commitment of President Trump to appoint justices who had a certain ideology on this that we were able to see Roe v. Wade overturned. And that ideology is really just ideology that recognizes the Constitution. Roe v. Wade is simply an unconstitutional mess. And so enough justices on the Supreme Court finally recognized that in 2022. Does that mean the fight is over? We can now move on from the pro-life issue? No, not at all. As I mentioned, we now have pro-abortion states and pro-life states. We have everything in between. The fight is really just beginning. Abortions are illegal in many states now, in virtually every case. in many of what we call red states, but the total number of abortions, get this, the total number of abortions since 2022 has actually gone up. And some would argue, see, overturning Roe v. Wade didn't help at all. No, it did help. Overturning Roe v. Wade helped a lot. It has helped state policy tremendously. So it's not that the overturning of Roe v. Wade was not helpful or bad. It was good. But what has happened around the same time since 2022 is that there has been widespread use of telehealth and widespread distribution of a certain kind of pill or combination of pills that can cause chemical abortions. The main culprit in this is a drug called mifepristone. And so now abortion has simply become a lot more convenient than it used to be due to technology, due to telehealth and the abortion pill. And so we're now in a situation where many states are restricting abortions, and you can see in many states where abortions are now restricted, those clinics that used to exist are closing down because they've been restricted from operating. But women are still able to do many things to get abortions. They can go to other states and visit the clinic there, or they can order chemical abortions that are sent right to their home, pills that they can take to kill their babies. And they can get on a telehealth call with a doctor from another state and have it shipped to them. And so we have legal challenges now surrounding this issue of how easy it is to get an abortion through these very, very easy chemical means. And so we're at this point now where abortion has found a new way to operate. And so the pro-life movement is really needed now more than ever. So let me remind you from last week, what are the 6 prongs of the pro-life movement? Heath Lambert, my colleague from seminary, he laid these out back in 2022 in a podcast that he recorded. Number 1 is intellectual leadership, books, podcast articles, think tanks doing the work of making a public case for the pro-life movement. Guess what? That's still needed today. We don't have a universal moral consensus on the issue of abortion. So we need pro-life leaders doing these things. Number 2, crisis pregnancy centers that minister to women and children, that help women choose life, that preach the gospel to them, that offer them support in raising their children, that offer a message of hope to women who've had abortions. Guess what? This is still needed. Crisis pregnancy centers are doing amazing work, and I urge you to support a local crisis pregnancy center in your community if you have one. And if you don't have one, maybe one needs to be started somewhere near where you are. That work is definitely needed. It has been tremendous in saving lives and in helping women to choose life and to hear the gospel when they do so. Number 3, promotion of adoption. This work is, of course, still needed today. We need to find homes for orphans. We need women who know, if I give birth to this child and I cannot raise him, that some other family can, and he can have a loving home. Number 4, protest and persuasion. This is still needed. Clinics have shut down in many places, but many clinics are still operating. And so we need people who are out there letting our voice be heard in very peaceful ways and who are persuading women not to go through with a decision to end their pregnancies. Number 5, supporting legislation that would reduce abortions. This is definitely needed on a state-by-state level. Many states, of course, have these restrictions in place, but many don't, and so that work is needed. Also, somehow we have to address chemical abortions in these tricky legal situations. What legislation can we pass? Let's say that in my state of Tennessee, how can the state of Tennessee ensure that the abortion pill is not being shipped across state lines to women in our state, and women at their own homes are murdering their children? How can we address that issue better? I don't know that kind of legal protection, or at least enforcement, is fully in place at this point. And this is where some new legal initiatives are needed, I believe. Maybe new laws. I don't know all the legal field at this point, but maybe we need new laws in place, or maybe we just need better mechanisms to enforce current law. But somehow we have to address this, and the pro-life movement needs to continue to work on this. Because think about this. What if a woman has a telehealth appointment with a doctor in California, and she orders a drug from California and it's shipped to her here in Tennessee? What can Tennessee do about that? Given current law and current enforcement, can Tennessee prosecute that doctor? Can Tennessee prosecute that pharmacist who sent the drug? This is where we need more clarity and we need more enforcement measures to stop this kind of thing from happening. Also, Lambert mentioned number 6, influence on appointment of judges, amendments to constitutions, getting into the deeper structures of our legal framework. Definitely that work is still needed. So I would say this, presidential elections matter on this more than anything. The President of the United States is the one who appoints federal judges. And of course, the Senate has to confirm them. So President and the Senate, if the President and the Senate are Republican, then we have hope. We don't have a guarantee, but we have hope that federal judges and future nominees to the Supreme Court will be strong on this issue. If the President and or the Senate are Democrat, then I think we can abandon hope that any advance is going to be made on the issue of being pro-life. That's just the political reality here in 2026 today. So this is why the pro-life movement is still needed today. Roe v. Wade opened up a new avenue for us, a new playing field where we can now fight out the issue legally state by state. But all the prongs of the pro-life movement are still needed and must be fully engaged. Now, think back in history. The push to overturn Roe v. Wade, it took almost 50 years. And yet the fight, as we say, is still barely started on defending life here in America. But think back to the issue of slavery. How did slavery end in the United States? That was also a long, drawn-out fight. It was in the late 1700s that a new nation was formed, and of course slavery was part of the equation at that time, and yet even then, it was a moral quandary. You can think back to how Thomas Jefferson was one of the founding fathers who owned slaves, but who also regarded slavery as a very troubling institution and a puzzle he didn't know how to get rid of, but he foresaw that it was going to be problematic for the new nation. Well, a number of states in the North had already started the movement to end slavery in the late 1700s, and gradually we saw slavery phased out in those northern states as their economy shifted to a more industrialized economy. By the early 1800s, I believe all slavery was ended across the board in the North, and in 1808, there was a ban passed by Congress on the importation of slaves from Africa. And so that was a step. Of course, slavery still existed in the United States, and slaves could be bought and sold within the states, but they could no longer be imported from Africa starting in 1808. Now, after this point, the southern states became more entrenched in the institution. Their economy depended much more on slavery, especially as the cotton gin made growing cotton much more profitable, and so they needed slaves to pick the cotton, as the cotton gin was able to remove the seeds from the cotton, but the cotton gin didn't pick the cotton, so they needed more slaves to go out and pick it. And so they became more entrenched in the institution, and it all, of course, came to a head when southern states seceded after the election of Abraham Lincoln, and ultimately that resulted in the Civil War. Now, in the course of the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. That was a war measure. That was not an across-the-board legal policy. He knew as president he didn't have the authority simply to declare slaves free, but he attempted, and of course it's debated whether he had the authority or not, but he believed he could claim the authority to free slaves in the states that were in open rebellion against the federal government at that time. And so as a measure of war, he declared them free. Now, obviously, that didn't mean that those slaves were immediately freed. It meant that as the Union Army progressed in its war efforts and it came to those states and conquered them, that then one of the aims of the war became to free those slaves that President Lincoln had declared free. And so those slaves were gradually freed during the course of the war as the Union Army became more and more victorious. But slavery across the board was not outlawed in the United States. It was not abolished until the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution on December 6th, 1865. So it was a long battle to end slavery, and there were many steps along the way, and it took almost 100 years from beginning to end to end slavery completely. It was long and it progressed in stages, and the same is true here in the fight for life. It will be a long fight. It already has been long. It will be longer still. But we can win this fight. We must persevere. And so I would say to all of you who want to end legal murder, who want to defend the life of the unborn and of any human being who might be defined out of personhood, continue this fight, continue working, continue fighting, continue in the 6 prongs of the pro-life movement so that we may see a more just future in our society. Don't give up, because the fight is well worth it. If you benefited from our podcast, would you consider subscribing on your favorite podcast app? Leave us a review. 5 stars would help others find us. And most importantly, share this with a friend who could benefit from listening. If you'd like to submit a question for our monthly Q&A episode, you can go to theoldroadspodcast.com and submit it there. You can also sign up as a patron to support us financially if you'd like to do so. Until next time, remember Jeremiah 6:16. Thus says the Lord, stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it and find rest for your souls.